Robert Fuller and Mike Boyne won't be able to make it, and Commissioner Sullivan is on. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is just going to be kind of informal. So if at any point in time you have any questions and you want to ask them, just feel free to stop me. There's a couple things that I do want to point out. While I provided you with your budget document, we have not yet read the budget message. That won't happen until May 8th. So we won't be discussing this budget document. And that's just per ORS 294. And so I can provide you, I can email you guys. You're welcome to look through it at any point in time. But I can also email this presentation to you guys as well, so that way you have this information for you. So just kind of some roles of the budget committee. The budget committee will hear the budget message, receive the document, and hear public and staff testimony. You'll approve the budget document as submitted by the budget officer or the budget document as revised and prepared by the committee. You'll set the property tax rate and or amount that may be imposed. You'll demand and receive from any officer, employee, or department any information that you require for revision and preparation of the document. And during consideration of the proposed budget, the citizen members of the committee shall also, do you want me talking into? Shall also review and fix the salaries for the Board of Commission. So just to kind of give you an idea of this process, we start this back in November, and during that time, we start updating the policies, we do some forecasting, some assumptions, we start working on cost sheets, which is the forecasting for personnel costs in the coming year. And that all happens between November and January. And then moving into January through March, we distribute that information to all the departments. They start submitting what they believe their projections to finish out the current year are, as well as their requests for the coming fiscal year. We also update any capital improvement items that they're going to be requesting, and just kind of updating any forecast stuff that we thought might have happened that either did or didn't, updating that information. So March through April, once the departments have all submitted their requested budgets, we then sit down with them and kind of go over things that they're asking for, things that they're projecting in the current year, to get an idea of, are you sure that this is going to be coming in? Are you sure you're going to be finishing this project and you don't need to budget for it next year? Those sorts of things. Then in May, that's when the budget committee gets together. We have our budget meetings. In June, we have our budget hearing, the first meeting of June, and then the last meeting of June, the board adopts the budget. We have to have an adopted budget by July 1 or we cannot operate. And then post-adoption, throughout the fiscal year, there are things that happen. There's budget adjustments that might be necessary because just unexpected things happened. Something that I'll go over as well, the state and federal grants, they are not on the same fiscal year as us, so we're always kind of having to make adjustments based on grants that they're distributing. So those sorts of things happen all throughout the year, and those are things that the board has the authority to do. So the board adopted budget policies. That's kind of our guiding principles whenever the departments are making their requests. Some major things is that the general fund departments are all provided with a base budget. So that means that their personnel costs, we take into account any negotiated salary increases, and then we estimate increases for health insurance costs, and then we also forecast our PERS rates, which we get PERS updates every 2 years, so we know what those rates are going to be. So we provide departments with those cost sheets, and that is for the staffing levels that they have in the current year. And then any materials and services that they're requesting is to remain the same. They cannot just increase those amounts. What they do during the requested budget process is if they have additional needs, like they're finding we need additional staff, they put the request in, and then at the end is when we can figure out, well, do we have enough resources to be able to grant these requests? Same for materials and services. You know, we keep it at a base budget amount to try and control the spending, but obviously we can't control vendors that we use that have inflationary costs. So in some instances, we have to increase some of those amounts, contract amounts for departments and stuff. Any savings during the fiscal year should not be spent. Those savings should be realized. We don't operate on the if you don't use it, you'll lose it motto. We still allow a department, if they had a savings, their base budget doesn't get reduced to the amount that they saved. They get the same amount that they had the previous year. And it's against county policy to backfill any shortfalls of state or federal funding. So the long-term financial plan that we have, we use that to control the size of government by matching spending to available resources. We maintain adequate reserves, and we pay for ongoing expenses from permanent funds and not volatile resources. So, kind of like I said before, when we're crafting our budgets, these are just future estimates of revenues. We don't have a crystal ball, so we can't say for sure. The federal Oregon legislature, they don't approve their budget process until September, and the federal government is October. So trying to figure out what they're going to give us when we have to forecast this stuff back in March is a little bit more complicated. Since state timber revenues can be very volatile, we maintain a 15-year low. So the lowest amount of timber revenue receipts in the last 15 years is what we budget for. So the last few years, we've seen good timber revenues, but we don't project those good revenues for next year. We maintain that 15-year low amount. And so then outside revenue that may fall short from estimates, we evaluate those on a case-by-case basis throughout the year, and that's where those budget adjustments come in. And again, we must adopt a balanced budget for all funds. So there are certain things that as the county we have to provide by law, and those are elections, health services, land use and planning, law enforcement and jail management, property deed recording and survey mapping, road construction and maintenance, and tax assessment collection. Within the board policies, there are priority service levels that the board has adopted. Number one being public safety and justice. Number two being public health. And I've listed out what public safety and justice is. So there's some things that you might not think, oh, really? That's public safety and justice? Like the law library. That's public safety and justice. Child custody mediation, emergency management. Public health, you have all of your community health type programs such as tobacco prevention, immunization, WIC, on-site sewage systems, and then also the mental health programs that we have. Number three is general government. Those your assessment and tax, your board of commissioners, basically your overhead departments, your central service departments, as well as information systems, HR, those sorts of things. Number four is community development, land use, housing, transportation, economic development, and capital. And then number five is culture and recreation. So when you read through your budget document, and feel free to kind of finger along while I go through this. So you're going to have tabs. Your first tab is your table of contents. This is going to be listed by page number, by functional area, or in the very back, if you just want to look up like the WIC program, it's in alphabetical order, and so you can find the page number next to it that way. In the introduction, that's going to list the Board of Commissioners, the lay budget committee members, and then the staff. And then the budget message, this is going to provide you just kind of an overall highlight of the major changes that are in the proposed budget, as well as any prior year comparisons. So getting through that budget message is really going to be helpful, kind of like saying, okay, here's some things that have changed. These are some positive things, or maybe some not so positive things. And so that's going to be your number one priority, is to get through that budget message. The next tab is the Reader's Guide. And this just has a lot of different information to kind of tell you the order of the budget document, the budget process, which I kind of went through in the beginning, as well as any requirements for Oregon budget law or GASB, our basis of accounting, that sort of stuff I'll go over it further in future slides, but it says, you know, this section, and it kind of has some tabs down below or numbers down below to say, you know, what this section is. Number 2 is this, number 3 is that. The statistical and supporting data, this has a ton of really, to me, interesting information. It's going to provide an overview of the county's demographics, as well as comparable statistical information to the state of Oregon, as well as to the United States. It's going to provide you with the budget fund structure. That's the part that governmental accounting kind of gets confusing to some people, because you have funds, and then you have org units, and then you also have functional areas, and you have governmental funds. So it kind of gets a little confusing there, and this kind of helps walk you through that process. It speaks to the programs that receive discretionary and or dedicated funds. It also has the BOC, the Board of Commissioners, their budget policies, resource management strategy, goals and visions. It has the long-range financial plan, the debt and fiscal policies, the capital improvement plan, and then it has some tax payment breakdown information. It's kind of interesting. The Tax and Assessment Office puts this together so you know of your dollar how much is going into the different things. And so the county, I believe, receives in the proposed budget is receiving 11.9 cents for every dollar spent on taxes goes to the county. The rest of it goes to other districts. It lists out the 20-year timber receipts, equipment lists, FTE, which is full-time equivalent employees, and then the salary schedules. Under the financial summary, this has a whole bunch of different charts. It's charts listing out the resources and appropriations, historical revenue charts, summaries of expenditures, and then you get into the functional areas. And these are what the departments are requesting. And so at the beginning of each functional area, there's a chart, and it's going to tell you for that functional area the total amount of appropriations, so the total amount that they're budgeting to spend. It's going to list of that total amount how much is being paid for by dedicated resources and how much is discretionary resources. And then it's going to list out all the org units that are listed in that functional area. So then once you get past that chart, then you start getting into the departments. And at the very top, sorry, this is a little bit, it didn't scan very well, but at the very top you see it says Special Fund 036 Building Codes Org ID 7165. So what that means is that it's a special fund. It's not part of the general fund. It is Fund 36, and it's Org Unit 7165. And so Building Codes then lists out what their mission statement is. As a county, we have an overall neighbor-to-neighbor serving classic county mission statement, but each department on their own has their own departmental mission statements. And then a department overview, which is just kind of telling you what the department is responsible for. Major accomplishments, those are things that they accomplished in the 17-18 fiscal year. And then performance measures. These are kind of your written performance measures. When we get a little bit further along, we'll also have the workload measures as far as what they've accomplished. And then they have their budget highlights. And this is the things that they're highlighting for their 18-19 budget. So major accomplishments is 17-18 and budget highlights is 18-19. Then you get into funding sources. And this is the way that they're getting their revenues. And so this particular department is a special fund, and they are 100% dedicated. They don't get any discretionary monies, meaning they don't get support from general funds. They don't get timber revenues, and so their money that they earn cannot be used anywhere else. It has to stay within building codes. It says the total revenue, it says the total unappropriated budget, and you'll see zeros there, and then the total budgeted resources. So they're budgeting all of what they're earning, but that doesn't mean they're spending all of what they're earning. They're budgeting contingency, which is basically a savings account. And then you get into the expenditures, and this expenditures carries over, this expenditure section, summarizes the categories as far as salaries and wages, and then all your other personnel benefits, which would be your retirement, your health insurance costs, And then it gets into materials and supplies, special payments, capital. Then it gets into the staffing summary. So this Oregon budget law requires that you have 2 years of actuals, a year of your adopted budget, which is 17-18, and then your proposed budget. And so here, again, we're using 17-18 numbers, so it's listing out the types of authorized personnel that they have, and you can see in 17-18, they increased their staff by a half of personnel. They went from 4.15 to 4.65. And then their measures. So for instance, in this department, they list out the actuals for 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, what they project 16, 17 is going to finish at, and then what 17, 18 they hope to accomplish. And so they've got, the number of inspections completed. So those are all workload numbers. And then down below, they have actual percentages. So permits issued within the same day percentage. They've increased from 80% to 85%. Above that, plan reviews completed within required time frame, they're at 95%. So. And then the summary, and this is a breakdown of all of the expenditures, and it lists it out by line item. So it lists it out by the category of personnel services for every line item, materials and services, every line item, and then it gets down to capital, transfers out, and then contingencies. So there's going to be one of those for every single org unit within the county. So when you're looking through these, one thing to remember is there's a difference between dedicated resources and discretionary resources. Dedicated resources means that the funds can only be spent for specific purposes, and because of constitutional provisions, enabling legislation, or grant constraints, something like that, those can't be spent by any other department. Maybe another department is having a hard time financially, and so you see this one's doing really well. Well, let's go ahead and move some of that money over and help them out. If it's dedicated, you cannot do that. Discretionary are the only funds that you can move around to different areas. So countywide for 17-18, 25.15% of the total budget was discretionary. The other 74.85% was dedicated. And so the general fund, all the programs that were mentioned previously, there's discretionary revenues that are the only revenues that can be moved between the programs. But even though the general fund is a majority of discretionary, there's still dedicated resources in the general fund. And so of the general fund, 38% of that is dedicated and 62% is discretionary. And these are all the general fund programs. And again, when you're looking through your book, at the very top, it's going to say general fund or special fund. So when you're looking at the discretionary for 17-18, 18.3 million was discretionary. And by functional area, this is kind of a breakdown of how those discretionary dollars were spent. So public health, the majority of public health is dedicated funding, but because, there are needs that aren't met by grants and the services, the charges that they have, the county does contribute general fund dollars there. So that money, once they receive it, they can put it to the programs that they can decide how they want to allocate it between those programs. That's it.
Well, that's great, Monica. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah,
Monica?
Yeah, so now's the question and answer time.
Yeah, so back one slide. So it's my understanding that public health, there are things that they are required to do, even though they may not have funding to do it.
Yes, and this
And
is
so that's where it comes from.
Exactly.
It's not just they could choose to do it, they are required to do it.
There's certain things, pretty much every single department within the county has certain state requirements that they have to provide. And so you can either skate by with a minimum and pay with it how you can, or you can use those discretionary dollars to support it to enhance those programs. And so currently the public health department is getting $461,000 to help enhance they've done an excellent job as well as far as getting additional grant money to pay for things as well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you guys have any questions? I know I kind of threw a whole lot at you, but I'm hoping to help you kind of help you figure out, because it's, you know, a 600-page document, but reading that budget message is really going to kind of help, you know, give you the highlights of what's happening. If you go back, when you're looking at these, like I said, it's going to tell you the last 2 years of actual, what was adopted, and then what's being, this says adopted twice because this was the adopted budget, but in your book it's going to say proposed. And so you can see in that column the dollar change, the percentage change. So it's going to tell you the change from what was adopted in 17-18 and what's being proposed in 18-19. So, you know, some of those, if you're looking through there and you're like, whoa, that's kind of a big number, what's going on there? Then you can kind of, the departments are asked to kind of highlight those things in their budget highlights. So you can go back there and be like, oh, okay, this is what they're planning to do, or why did it decrease so much? Oh, it was a one-time project that they have accomplished, and so now they don't need the funding for that.
I just wanted to thank you again. And I just wanted to let the new board members of the budget committee know that, you know, the first year, it's really easy for me now after 8 years of this. But the first year, when I got the budget document and it was just very confusing to me. And it took me a while to kind of figure it out. And one thing I realized, and the next year, and staff is always ready to explain some minutiae if you have any questions. But one thing I realized, and right away, is that this is a very well done document. And staff works really hard on this. We've won awards over the years on it. And so it may seem intimidating at first, but just kind of go with the flow, and next year it'll all kind of gel. And it may gel halfway through for you, but definitely reach out to staff.
Yep, please do, yeah. One thing too, and it's not up there for 18-19, it's only the adopted 17-18, but on the county's website, and I didn't provide the link, but there is, it's a open budget module, and so it's kind of a neat feature. So you can look at 17-18 and you can click on it, and it kind of drills down. So if you want to know, okay, general government, what's that? Drills down, and it's going to show you what's been budgeted there, and then it's going to take you all the way down to this line item detail. So that's kind of just a fun, interactive way to just kind of not have to page through. I mean, you'll have to page through this because it's not up for the 18-19, it's just 17-18, but to kind of try and familiarize yourself with the different programs and such. Yep.
So if we have questions in between our budget meetings, go to you?
We
Don't
can't,
talk to anybody?
no, you can't discuss the budget document until the budget message has been
Well,
sent.
I understand.
Yeah.
But after that,
Oh, yeah.
if I'm thumbing through and I have a question, should I
Yeah.
go to you instead of somebody else I see on an org chart who may have an answer?
You're welcome to address the staff as well, the department heads preferably, because the staff don't help with this part. But yeah, you can contact me as well. We sit in on all of these meetings, and so I get to know their budgets pretty well and can help you. So then if you do have multiple questions, that way you don't have to go from department to department. But during the budget meeting process, also what will happen is on the morning, we will read the budget meeting, or I'm sorry, budget message, and then we'll go through this document by functional area. So it'll start with public safety and justice, and we'll just kind of scroll through. And those department heads, as well as any staff that they require there, will be there to answer questions and, you know, just to kind of give you a highlight as to what's going on with their budget as well. So they'll talk to you on that day as well and be there to answer questions.
More meetings in here?
Yes, yeah, it's the easiest place to fit everybody. Yeah. And so the meeting is on the 8th, and it starts at 9 a.m. The meeting that takes place on the 9th is just for the districts, and the lay budget committee is not, they're not for the districts, we don't require your presence with that. And then if necessary, the second day would be on Thursday the 10th, also beginning at 9 a.m.
In some years, like last year, I wasn't here, and the meeting went all day. Usually I try to get it done in a half day, so we don't have to come back to that Thursday meeting. So my goal this year is to make sure that I don't miss this meeting, and that we get home back to our families in a reasonable hour.
Yeah.
But it's straightforward, and like I said, at first, I was really kind of overwhelmed, but then it really kind of comes together. There's a lot of information.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't go, in the very back, you have a couple more tabs. They're inactive budgets. We have to leave them there if there's any kind of activity going on there until it's completely blank. And then also the appendix. So if you're looking through this and you're like, what is SAFE or what is FICA? Those acronyms and definitions are also in the back under the law. So kind of, you know, different departments have different terminology that they shorten and you're like, what in the world? So, yeah. Any other questions? No. Any questions? No.
All right, thank
Okay.
you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
We're going to adjourn this meeting, and then we'll be